Well, you can see I've got a couple of washers here and a screw. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to clamp that cord between the washers so that it stays where it's left at the top of the camera while I'm fighting with the bottom part. So you need to decide on some convention here, whether the cord from the front of the pulley, you're going to take it to one side or the other of that screw. Now these cords are just twisting up here. I've got to untwist them so that they're running parallel. I'm going to make the one from the rear pulley run towards the end of the camera. I'll stretch that over the top of that screw and washer arrangement, and I just want that to run between the washers. Likewise, its mate from the other side. And this is so that when I do the screw up, it'll clamp that cord. Don't overdo it because you'll cut through the cord, of course. Okay, so I've got my meter cord positioned in place at the top, and that's firm, that's not falling apart now. I can see where I am. I know that my front cord here, which is going to go to the front position here, is on this side, and the long one, because I've got these as two different lengths, it's easier for me to tell them apart. So now I will try getting these things on the lower drum and see if I have any more success. In theory, I'll get my cord correctly wrapped around the drums here. It'll be reasonably taut at this point. I'll be able to take my screw and washer out from this, washers out from under there, tighten the tension at this point, and everything will be Jake. It'll be absolutely perfect. Is that likely to happen? Yeah, it's been known to happen. Sometimes things go very smoothly. Do they go smoothly very often? No. No, they don't. So I've got my cord here and I'm busy trying to get it into the slots at the back of the drum, running the cord round in opposing directions without losing the tension on anything while I do it, so that the stuff falls off the pulleys. Now I've wrapped that round the wrong way. I think that's, no, it's fallen off the blooming pulley again. Let's just get that wrapped around there. It's very hard keeping the tension on the cord while you're manoeuvring stuff. Now that one's fallen out completely. Okay. As I said, none of this is impossible, it's just tedious. Of course, it all goes much smoother if you haven't got an audience at the time. No matter how many times you do this, it's always going to be awkward, and it's absolutely essential that you get it right. That looks pretty good to me. I'm going to take these washers, screw and washers out at the top here and check my cable run, make sure I haven't twisted anything over itself, making sure that the cord runs parallel through here, that the one from the front pulley goes to the front pulley, the one from the back pulley goes to the back pulley, that the cord is running in the correct direction. at the rear cord bottom, rear pulley at the bottom here, it should go to the top of this drum, and from the front pulley at this point it should go to the bottom of the drum. That looks correct. Now that cord is quite tight there, you can hear that. Flicking that with my fingernail, that cord is quite tight. Even though I've got my adjustment up, slackened right off there. I'll see if I can get any more movement out of that. Not really. That's as tight as you could have it. Now if I turn this drum at the bottom, the meter drum at the top should rotate. We haven't got this pegged. The cord is just loosely wrapped around that drum. It's just friction moving the drum. We haven't got it pegged yet. So all I'm doing now is I want to make sure that the cord runs smoothly over the drum at the bottom of the camera. I need to make sure that the cord isn't knotted. It's not running over itself, or that it's just running relatively smoothly. That appears to be pretty good. If your cord was thin or your knots were not sufficiently lumpy, they might pull out of the slot down here, but that appears to be quite good. So at this point I can think about the rough setting of the meter position, and I say that because we'll have to fine tune that. So with the meter drum, the pointer is pointing off in this corner here at the back. We're set at ASA 10, which is DIN 12 by the looks of it. Our drum at the bottom of the camera, the slot should be pointing this way, towards the end of the camera. The slot up here, I think that technically it's supposed to be pointing at 11 o'clock. I think that's what they said. If it's pointing, yeah, that'd be about right. The slot in the drum's pointing at about 8 o'clock. So the cord here runs round the drum, in the front position runs round the drum here once and stops here. So it's 3/4 of a turn. And the multiple coils are on the back of the other, in the rear position. That meter is set just about ideally, ready for everything to go back together. Now, I'm fortunate in this case because here the meter is held snugly in position. My cord is nice and snug. I don't need to do anything about adjusting that by the looks of it. It's not over tight, everything seems to move quite smoothly. And that camera body is ready to have the shutter assembly put back in place. I'll do the rangefinder last of all. One of our biggest liabilities at this point is that meter. If that comes adrift, it just swings up, the cord falls off the pulleys here, you lose all your tension down here, it all turns to custard, you've got to start again. I think I can put the top cover loosely in place now to hold that meter in position so that it's not going to jump off and cause me grief. Where's my shutter button? Just put the shutter release button in position. And put my top cover in position. I'll put a couple of screws in that top plate to keep everything together. The top cover, I haven't done anything to this yet, it needs to be cleaned. But we need to get the rangefinder back on before we get to doing anything dramatic with that. What I'm most concerned with here, and what you'll be concerned with, is that that meter does not get disturbed. Right, camera body's in good state there now. Before the shutter goes back on, we've got our washers, our spacer washers. These are cup shaped. They're arranged so that the hollow sides are opposed to each other. This gives you the maximum amount of adjustment, because we're going to be adjusting the front position of the camera to make sure that the lens mount to film plane distance is exactly correct. And that's done by tightening the screws against the action of these washers, which acts like strong springs. That's our camera body that is ready to have the shutter put back. Well, here's our shutter assembly as we left it. I'll just return that down to the B position there. Check that everything else is in place. That all looks good. What have we not got in it? We have not got our rangefinder coupling in it. Okay, so I'll get this back in. These three components will pass in from the front. It's very easy to lose that little tube there. Make sure you do not. It slides in through this hole in the front of the body here. Support that with my finger from underneath. This piece goes in place. The hollow side of that goes to the back. And here's our collet. The large end of the collet goes over the pin. And how far does the collet go on? You want probably less than 1 millimetre of pin sticking out beyond the end of that collet there. About 0.5 millimetre is pretty good from memory. Yeah, that'll be fine. If you have that collet pushed too far down over there so that you've got lots and lots of pins sticking out the back of the collet, you won't have proper travel for the rangefinder, and you'll find that the close focus distance, it doesn't move back far enough to follow the action of the focus at the close focus end of the scale. Well, this shutter should just about be ready to put back on the body. So we'll start with this in the uncocked position. And I have the body here. Now remember, I'm using a short base plate here, so I've got nothing fouling me here. I'm going to be hooking the shutter assembly in underneath the chrome trim at the top here. I've got to couple the cocking shaft here. This rangefinder coupling here, what I typically do is I just push that well forward. I'm hold that with my finger like this, so it's not pushing back, so it's not blocking anything. Our shutter release here, that ends up underneath the shaft here. Now be aware of that, because sometimes it's hard to get things to go. And we will have to wriggle this about, because we've got to get this plastic mount here seated through inside the hole. And if that baffle at the back has come adrift and it's not sitting seated correctly in place, it will be holding things up. But if everything goes really, really well, this will go on first time, no arguments, and everything will be great. Now I'm just going to put a little bit of synthetic grease on the pinion here, on the shaft and on the teeth, nothing dramatic. And here's the moment of truth. Will it go? Of course, we've got to do this without disturbing the position of those washers. That is not exactly centering up. Hang on, something just sort of more or less fell into place. But did I do that without disturbing my washers? No, let me just get those washers lined back up. Right, you probably heard that crunchy sound as things sort of fell into place. I think our gears are lined. Everything just fell in. Now, is it in the correct position? We don't know. I've got to get my 4 screws in the front because there's nothing holding those washers in place at the moment. If I pick the camera up, they could fall out of position. Now one of these screws will be cleaner than its mates. It'll be the one from up here because it didn't have leatherettes stuck over it. I just want to get these screws down lightly. I'm most concerned with that the washers don't get away. It's not my birthday, so there's no special reason to think that everything fell into exactly the right spot. But let's find out. If I cock the shutter, I could tell that didn't cock the shutter. We're at least one tooth out. So what can I do about that? Well, there's a couple of things you can do about that. You can just do this job again, which I've just done, of lifting it out, shuffling it back into place and hoping things fall into line. Or you can shift the shutter cocking rack. I'll show you how to shift the shutter cocking rack. So basically the problem we've got is the timing between this wheel here and the shaft that comes through from the cocking rack is out of time by a matter of a tooth or so. Now there's something you can do about that. First you need to know which direction things are supposed to be moving. So I'm just going to wind the film advance and see which way that wheel goes, and I can see that as I wind the cocking rack, this big wheel at the front moves anti-clockwise. So now I've got some direction there that I can use for information. We've got a clamp plate here which holds the cocking rack down in firm contact with the shaft that runs through. I'm going to slacken the 2 screws. This one here is awkward to get at underneath the meter because it's hard to get to that without disturbing the meter, which of course we don't want to do. This one here is much easier. That's no argument. So what I'll do is I'll just slacken that screw right up, get in with my screwdriver, loosen the other one without disturbing my meter. Now my cocking rack can float. With my cocking rack held up, I can revolve that front wheel anti-clockwise a notch and then drop the cocking rack back into position. That's the theory. Oh yeah. Let's try it right there. Now there's quite a bit of play there, which suggests to me that I started off in the wrong position with the wheel when I put the front on the camera. Let's see what happens. Oh, that made a weak click, but it didn't quite get there, so I'm still not quite there, but I'm close. So I'll just slacken those screws off again. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing. Now, can you overdo this? Yes, you can. If you get it one tooth too far advanced, you'll end up with a shutter that cocks nicely, but you'll end up with a self-timer that won't run down. Let's get these screws loosely done up. Okay. I'm in business. So that's good. The timing seems fine. Let's try the self-timer. I'll set my shutter to 1 second. Cock the shutter. Release it. That went immediately. What happened? Oh, I didn't set the self-timer. What an idiot. Set the self-timer. It didn't run down. Now the self-timer didn't run down because I've got that too far advanced here. Basically the mechanism's holding it back from reaching its start position. Okay, well that's a handy thing to know. I'll go back and fiddle with this some more. Yeah, that's what it was, because as soon as I lifted that, it started to run. Let's try it in that position. Okay. That goes. Yeah, so basically what I've done is I've just changed the timing of our cocking rack to the shaft that travels through the front of the camera. I haven't changed the timing of the cocking rack to the film advance. That's buried under here where we can't get at it easily anyway. I'll tighten these 2 screws up now. As I said, this 1 by the metre is hard to get at, which means it's hard to tighten up again too. I'm just trying to get, I can't really see it very clearly here. There we go. That's good. So the film release in this camera is not right, because when I press the shutter release, it doesn't unlock the film advance. So that screw that's visible on top of the release shaft needs to come up so that the shutter release hits it earlier in the stroke and releases it. So I'm going to bring that up a good turn and see what happens if we do that. not enough. This is another screw that's hard to get at without disturbing the meter. Take pains not to disturb the meter. Yeah, that's it. That adjustment's right. The film releases at the right time, so that's good. So the meter's in place. The shutter cocks and fires correctly. I've got my 4 screws on the front of the camera. They are loosely in place. They're not tight yet because I've got to set my film plane distance here. But basically that's a goer. I'll put the top cover back in place because I'm not ready to why is that not dropping on? Oh, that shutter release has popped off. Okay. I'll put my top cover in place because I haven't done the rangefinder yet and cleaned and serviced that. And I haven't set the film plane distance. Now, any amount of handling of the camera with the top cover off is risky because it means that you're exceptionally likely to disturb that meter, and all that fun getting the front back on, getting the timing correct between the cocking rack and the shutter, getting the meter cord over its drums correctly will be undone. So leave that all well alone. Right, so setting the film plane, the lens mount to film plane distance next. That needs to be 47.6 millimeters. And I need to set up to do that.